our topic is in selected best practices in automated software testing lifecycle methodologies. My name is Tom McGibbon. I'm director of the Data and Analysis Center for Software. Today we have a very interesting webinar, and with two presenters, Bernie Gauf and Elfriede Dustin from Innovative Defense Technologies. Just so everybody knows, a couple of ground rules here, that all the audio lines are muted, so we, the organizers and the presenters, aren't able to hear you. So to ask technical questions, you should use the GoToWebinar control panel, and you'll see an area on there for question and answers, and we'll be happy to answer all of your questions. Should you have GoToWebinar issues, or such as not being able to hear or not being able to see the slides, I'll give you a phone number to call, a help phone number for GoToWebinar. It's 1-800-263-6317. Okay, so if we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, this is just to say that, you know, we're more than happy to answer your questions, so we'd suggest that you contact the presenters, and there's the email addresses of the presenters here. However, because of copyright issues, copies of the slides will not be distributed. So again, contact either myself or the presenters. So let's go to the next slide, please. All right, so I'll just very briefly talk about the Data and Analysis Center for Software, the DACS. As it says there on the left, the DACS is a formal organization that is chartered by the DoD when we're in business to collect, analyze, and disseminate scientific and technical information to the software engineering community. And the icons around this page show some of the things that we do. We have a very active website, so we have lots of web resources on our website in all areas, including testing. We provide a number of products. Most of these products are information products, papers, and things of that sort. For example, we have a software reliability source book and a product that talks about return on investment from process improvement. We also are able to respond to technical inquiries. We can provide up to 4 hours of free technical inquiry service to our customers. So if you have technical questions, feel free to ask us after the fact or during the webinar. Many people know us because of our technical journal, the DoD Software Tech News. The one here is shown was a previous one on secure software engineering. We anticipate that a future one within the next year will be on testing and automated software testing. We also offer a number of consulting services, whether it be in process improvement related topics, testing products, or design and development of software systems. And finally, related to today's course, we do offer training courses. We have recently begun these webinars, and so we're very excited to be able to offer these webinars as well. So if we go to the next slide. Okay, so at this point, I'll turn the presentation over to Bernie, and so feel free to get started, Bernie. Thank you.
All right, thank you. We can go to the next slide. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Tom, for the chance to participate. IDT specializes in the design, development, and implementation of automated software testing solutions. In particular, large, complex software systems that are Linux or Unix-based with applications that have been developed in C++ or Java, and where regression testing is a key part of the overall test program. We deliver turnkey automated test suites that include automated test strategies and identification of the highest payoff areas to apply automation for your project. Recommend tools to be used. We can either use your existing test cases or help develop test cases for you and provide the test results documented and requirements traceability matrix. We can also provide train and pilot project implementation with your team. The challenge that we're trying to help with is delivery dates get set for software baselines. The time allocated to testing usually at best stays the same from delivery to delivery, and there's often a lot of pressure actually to reduce the time allocated to testing. But at the same time, the software baseline is getting larger and more complex with each delivery. So the relative test time is usually shrinking as the product matures. And so the challenge is increasing productivity and quality of testing that you're doing today. And typically, at least 50% of the development cost is testing. And the testing that's done often needs to improve. There was a National Institutes of Standard and Technology report that described software errors costing the U.S. economy almost $60 billion a year annually, and they estimated a third of these costs could be eliminated by simply improved testing. So we believe that utilizing strategies and processes and technologies, you can improve testing productivity and quality, and that's what we call automated software testing. There was a Colorado State University report on automatic test software, and in that they described the use of automation in hardware testing and how it had evolved from primarily being manual to automated, and they described that's the future for software development, and we certainly believe the report from Colorado State and what they talked about is the viability of automated testing for software. There was a Quality Assurance Institute study that was done, compared manual and automated testing that showed a net result in 75% reduction in hours using automation. What they showed was that test plan development took a little bit more time, but then after that, especially if you notice like test execution, was a substantial reduction in hours. And I'd add that for projects with an ongoing long-term need for retesting or regression testing, that using automation would even provide a more dramatic reduction in hours compared to the manual approach. Couple projects we recently worked on, they happened to be for the U.S. Navy. They resulted in more than a 75% decrease in test time while being able to execute more than 5 times the number of test cases they were able to previously run manually. Fully documented test cases and results, and probably most important to them, a comprehensive regression test capability. So the decrease in test time and improvement in test and quality is both real and substantial. We've conducted an automated software testing survey over the last several months. We've had about 300 respondents. We posted it on QA user group sites, sent it out to test engineers and a number of government tech sites. And out of that, the response was very diverse from an organizational perspective. About 40% of the respondents were with organizations less than 300 people. There were about 30% that fell somewhere in between 300 and 10,000 employees, and then another 25% that were in very large organizations, more than 10,000 employees. So, like I said, the response was a pretty diverse set of organizations. And we asked them about the time they spent on software testing. The results were very consistent with other publication reports, and that a lot of time is spent on testing. We had 20%, almost 20% of the respondents say somewhere between 50 to 75% of their time was spent on software testing, and 30 to 50% of the time, about half the people responded to that. And then we had more than 70% state that automation is useful, and their management agreed, but either they had not implemented it at all or it had limited success. And the reason for not implementing was really lack of time and experience. That was the overwhelming response. And so the most important takeaway from the survey is that the value of automated testing is generally understood, but often what we hear is it does not get implemented either due to lack of experience, and that might come out as, we can't automate the type of testing we do, or it's attempted but it's not successful because of a lack of experience. And often what we hear there is we thought the tool that we bought was going to do that for us. And so that is what we wanted to share with you today, is some of our experiences and best practices in automation to help you along the way. But before we started that, Tom, I wanted to ask you if you could maybe poll everybody on some of the questions about their level of automation and maybe their experience in it for us.
Okay, I will. Let's see. All right, so we will be, we have 5 questions here we'll be asking you. So we, first of all, need to get a context of where you come from, so what best describes where you work. We'll give you another 10 or 15 seconds to respond to this. I'll close the poll there. That's the first question. The next question is what your primary role is as it relates to testing. And you can reply directly on the screen. There are 5 seconds. Okay, close that one. The next question relates to what your current state of automated software testing is. Give you 30 seconds for this too. That. And asking the same question a different way, the current level of automation in terms of percentage. Final question is what your assessment is in terms of a payoff automation. Okay, we'll close the poll there, and so back to you, Bernie.
All right, with this, I'm going to turn it over to Elfriede, and she's going to talk more detail about some of the methodologies that we've employed and some of the practices with them.
Good morning, everyone. This is Elfriede Dustin, and I will be talking about the automating testing lifecycle methodology and some of the best practices associated with it. So before we get started on the best practices, I just wanted to explain what the ATLM is. So the ATLM consists of 6 phases, and you could actually run it in parallel to your system development lifecycle. So if, for example, you are maybe at an evaluation phase. You're looking at how your software development processes are working and how you could improve them. You might consider automated software testing. So this is where the first phase of the ATLM is decision to automate. Then during your requirements phase, you need to know the requirements before you can buy the tool. You conduct the test tool acquisition. And then you want to introduce the testing tool. During the system design and development phases, this is when you can do your test planning and development, and then you do your execution and your test program review and assessment. We show this as a parallel to the software development lifecycle, but in reality, the ATLM phases could be implemented at any point in the software development lifecycle. So really, the ATLM is tool agnostic, so it's not specific to any tool. You don't have to buy Mercury or Rational to implement it. It's process agnostic, meaning it can be used independently of any development process, whether you use test-driven development, the waterfall process, so it's independent of any processes, and it's phase agnostic. As I already mentioned, if you decided to start your automated testing during the system design and development phase, it would still be applicable. So we just wanted to summarize some of the selected best practices that have worked for us in the course of the ATLM. So when you decide to automate, there's some things you want to consider. First, you want to understand the problem you're trying to solve. A lot of times when people think of automated software testing, they think of capture playback tools only. But there might be some other issues that you're trying to solve. So it's important that you know the types of tools available. And we also think it's very important that you manage expectations, because automated software testing requires specific expertise, and sometimes a learning curve is required. So really understand the true benefits of automated software testing and know what to automate. So here's an example. You could implement automated software testing throughout the entire testing lifecycle. So where do you really have the biggest issues in your software development lifecycle? Have you found a lot of memory leaks in your software? Maybe you want to buy memory leak detectors. What about your security testing issues? Be aware of all the security testing tools available, all these different tools that can help you automate your software testing lifecycle. So here are some of the type of tools, in addition to the ones I already mentioned. Be aware of them. There are code coverage analyzers. They can identify untested code, support dynamic testing. Then there are your security testing tools and your static and dynamic code analyzers. Memory leak detection tools, as already mentioned, they can verify that the memory resources are managed properly. And your metrics reporting tools. Maybe you care about the cyclomatic complexity and other kind of metrics information out of your source code. Maybe you care about usability. Maybe usability is an issue and your customers are complaining. Maybe your requirements are not being tracked properly or your tests are not managed properly. Maybe you need to test your networks, or maybe you need to test all of the above. But it's important that you know there's various types of tools available that can help you in your automated software testing. So, as already mentioned, most people think of GUI testing tools when they think of automated software testing, but there's so many more tools available. Also, think of the tools that can help make a tester's life easier, such as VMware, that allow for imaging of operating systems, so you don't have to use multiple hardware and you can just run all the different operating systems on one machine. So it's very important to know the types of tools available and the problem that you're trying to solve. Also, don't overestimate the improvement opportunities. Consider the additional time to introduce a tool. Remember that tool expertise and programming expertise is required. Consider the learning curve. Consider the training costs. And don't treat automated software testing as a side activity. It really is software development. So that's the kind of selected best practices we have in mind when we decide to automate testing. Next, you want to acquire the tool because now you understand which problem you're trying to solve. Now you go out and you acquire the tool. So the important best practice we would like to get across is that it's important to know what types of tools are available. Don't only focus on the vendor-provided tools. We actually, in the course of this presentation, will look at some noteworthy open-source testing tools. Also, sometimes you actually have to develop in-house, so consider in-house development and know your system engineering environment. So one of the best practices and what we have found worked very well for us is not to only focus on the vendor-provided tools. So most of us think, IBM Rational, Functional Tester, or any of those type of testing tools, or HP Mercury, WinRunner, Quick Test Pro, or RadView, or any of those major vendor-provided tools. But there are many excellent open-source testing tools and frameworks available that can actually enhance some of the tools available. Some of the noteworthy open-source testing tools and frameworks we have found, and we would like to mention here, is the Eclipse Test and Performance Tools Platform project, TPTP. It originally was created by IBM. There's also the Open System Engineering Environment led by Boeing, and we've had a lot of success with the Software Test Automation Framework, Gauf and Stacks, led by IBM. So a little bit more detail about those open source testing tools that we think are very interesting and people should actually take a look at. So the TPTP provides a framework and service for an open platform where developers can actually build unique test and performance tools. So they can add open source and commercial tools that easily integrate with Eclipse and other tools. And here's the website if you want to read up on it some more. The Open System Engineering Environment is very similar. It provides an extensible application framework and core services which enable a rich and diverse set of applications to share a common persistence layer. So again, you can add to it as you desire and as needed. Here are some of the services that this Open System Engineering Environment provides. So whether you want to do your unit testing, your security testing, all these types of services you can include in here in this framework. And then the Software Test Automation Framework, Stacks, is the website. It's, again, an open source automation framework designed around the idea of reusable components called services. And if you just take a look at some of the services this open source framework provides out of the box. So you can see all this, instead of you having to develop it yourself, it's already provided by the open source product. So you can see the different services, whether it's a process, whether you're queuing, whether you need shutdown. It's already available from the open source product. It even comes with external services. So if, for example, you want to send off your batch testing or kick it off at a specific time of the day, you can just call it existing cron service. If you want to notify somebody because a defect has been generated or a test case didn't pass, you can actually already use this email feature that comes with this open source testing tool. So when you think of the automation tasks, such as, we have the automation startup, we start up our environment with the system set up, then we execute our test cases, we analyze the test case output, we clean up, then we have a results notification, automation completion. Take a look at Staff and Stacks, and it provides all those services already out of the box. Then not only do we automate our software test cases, but also we have found an open source testing tool that helps us with our defect tracking. So one of the tools that was noteworthy for us is Track, which is an open source project management tool that integrates a wiki, DR tracking, and software configuration management. So Track, the nice thing about this defect tracking tool, out of the box, it integrates with a configuration management tool. It's integrated with Subversion. If you want more information on defect tracking tool, here's the website. When you think about automated testing, you also have to think about the security testing tools. There's so many open source testing tools, and we wanted to let you know about some of the open source security testing tools, such as the open source puzzles, open source snippers. And again, you don't have to always go out and purchase expensive vendor-provided tools. So why would you not only go with vendor-provided tools? Well, sometimes you have to just consider the cost and maintenance fees, or sometimes there might be operating system compatibilities. I'll talk about that later. For example, some of the major vendor-provided GUI capture playback tools don't work necessarily on a Linux or Unix environment. When I'm talking about major vendor-provided, I mean HP Mercury or IBM Rational, so on. So maybe because of that, you have to go to open source. There might be some other application technology compatibility issues, or you might have specialized testing needs. So consider, when you go open source, you have no licensing issues. Consider the portability. A lot of times, the open source frameworks that we're working with, they use Python as the scripting language, and we all know how portable that is. A lot of times they're easy modifiable, adaptable, and you're really not tied to one vendor. So just consider, as part of the best practices, that automated GUI testing tools have their limitations. If you want to automate through the interface, it can be really too slow. In our case, we were testing 42,000 messages, and trying to do that through an interface could have been too slow, could have taken too long, and sometimes it's too unstable. So it might be better to just do gray box testing, where you actually test directly at the middleware or middle layer instead of through the interface. So effective test automation exercises the core functionality, and an effective automated testing is really done at the not only black box, but at the gray box level. So some of the other selected best practices as part of your test tool acquisition is that you need to know your system engineering environment. Just because a tool worked well for you in a Windows environment doesn't necessarily mean that this tool will work well for you in a Linux or Unix environment. And then also consider the in-house development. Consider the use of scripting languages, JavaScript, Perl, Python. They work very well for us for our test case development. And then also you want to conduct a tool evaluation. The way we do it, we have a set of specific tool requirements. We assign a weight importance of each requirement, and then we evaluate the tools and rank them. And actually, I can just give you a quick example. When we evaluated one of the defect tracking tools, so what we did, we picked a bunch of the major vendor-provided tools. We also looked at some of the open source defect tracking tools, such as Bugzilla and Track. We had criteria, our requirements. Security was a high requirement. We assigned, for all the different criteria that we had, we assigned a weight, and then we evaluated each tool. We installed the tools, evaluated based on the criteria, and then we gave it a score. And the tool with the highest score actually, was then chosen. So it's important when you do your tool evaluation that you understand your tool requirements, assign a weight, and then rank them. So that's really all I wanted to say on test tool acquisition. Once you have your tool in-house, now you want to start introducing the tool. Ideally, you have a small pilot project or pilot task to demonstrate automated software testing. It's also important that you educate the developers on the automated testing tool and the testability requirements and how changes to the code can affect the test automation implementation. And also consider process changes required to accommodate automated testing and conduct ongoing lessons learned. We never wait till the end of a life cycle to do lessons learned or evaluation. We do it as we implement our tests. Just a quick discussion. A lot of times people ask, what can a developer do to support automated testing? It's very important that they're aware how their changes to the software code can affect the automated software testing framework. So in the case of a capture playback tool, if you recorded your baseline using GUI IDs and the developer changes them, now your automated testing framework is useless and you have to replace all your automated tests. And it's also important that the developers use logging to increase the system testability. So we know we get useful error messages when we do our automated testing. So now I want to talk a little bit about the test planning, design, and development when it comes to automated software testing. First, evaluate what to automate. You don't necessarily want to automate everything. You want to prioritize your automation. So it's important you understand the requirements, what needs to be tested, and what should you automate. So what we generally do, we review the requirements, we look at interface design documentation, and we conduct technical interchange meetings. Also consider what you're automating. Consider your testing phase. Are you in unit testing and integration? Are you system testing? What is your focus? Are you focusing on the functionality? Are you focusing on the security, performance, compatibility, internationalization, or any of those testing focuses? And you still have to design your test using specific testing techniques. I just want to have a quick discussion on how to evaluate what to automate. So, as I already mentioned, not everything can be or should be automated. Don't automate all at once, prioritize. And what we've seen in other companies before is where people actually duplicate the code of the application on their tests. You don't want to do that. Look at the reuse potential. A lot of times the most repetitive tasks are the ones that you want to automate. Data-driven tasks, we found the most return on investment when we automate our regression tests. With concurrency testing, it's almost impossible not to automate. I mean, it's almost impossible to do concurrency testing without automation. And automated testing that manual testing can hardly accomplish, such as security, evaluating codes for flaws, memory leak detection, code coverage, performance and stress testing. Another example where we found automation very useful is report comparison. If you're comparing the report output of a previous version of a software release to a new release, trying to do that manually can be very cumbersome. Data migration testing is where you really want to do your automation. And then technology changes with controls changes. So evaluate whether you want to automate that. You still need to design your test cases. So understanding the need for testing techniques is still necessary. You still need to understand, your white box, gray box, and black box technique. You can also use test data generators. You want to automate your test data generation, and I'll talk about that a little bit too, what types of tools you can use. And most importantly, you want to automate test data output analysis of actual versus expected results. The pitfall that we avoid is that we don't do test automation unless we have documentation or we have designed our test cases. A lot of times people think that when they automate tests, that documentation is not necessary any longer, but that would be not a good practice. So some of the testing techniques to keep in mind when you derive your test cases is, your boundary value analysis, your equivalence classes, and also conduct some exploratory testing. And avoid these pitfalls. Just because automated testing makes it easier to pump thousands of test scenarios through a framework, it doesn't necessarily increase your testing coverage, because sometimes you can just be using a similar or same data type, just a different value. In this way, you're testing the same code path over and over again, just using a different value. So ask yourself, does the test add value? Does it really increase your testing coverage? So consider your boundary value, equivalence class, and all those techniques for your test case when you derive your test cases. Since you'll be, for automated testing, it really helps to actually automate your test data generation too. So you want to have a huge list of permutations and combinations of test data, trying to cover all the different scenarios and the different data paths. Keep in mind there's test data generation tools available, such as for pairwise testing. There's various pairwise testing tools available. Orthogonal array testing, you can actually see my article on stickymice.com. It's called Orthogonally Speaking. You just go to stickymice.com. You can search for it. And then NIST is giving a presentation at the Verify conference on October 29th and the 30th in Crystal City. And here's the website. They will be talking about covering arrays that also will help reduce your test data while still maintaining coverage. Another thing that we have found that's very important is that you have to automate your test analysis. So even if you now have thousands of test cases automated, but your analysis is not automated, now you could spend much more time analyzing the results. So it's very important that you analyze, that you automate the analyzing of the results. A lot of times people are still sold on the capture playback tools. The vendors do a pretty good job in selling capture playback tools, but why is capture playback out of the box useless? And here are just some reasons for why capture playback is just not working for us. If we record a script, it will generate hard-coded test data. It will generate hard-coded data paths. It will not allow for looping. You actually have to go in. If you wanted to read data from a file, you actually have to go in and modify the script. There's no modularity if you just press the record button. No error handling. So none of the additional features required to make testing effective or automated software testing effective will work out of the box. So capture playback is really in itself not a good practice when it comes to automated software testing. So that's really all I wanted to say on test planning, design, and development, some of the selected best practices that come to mind for us. Regarding execution and management of tests, well, whether you do automated testing or manual testing, control of the test environment is always important, isolation of problem causes, and it's also important that you use correct baseline test data and that you have effective defect tracking methods. What has worked very well for us is if we automate the entire process, where we say we automate the requirements to the test case management, to the test case execution, to the defect tracking software lifecycle flow. Sometimes people ask about what metrics should I track when I do automated testing. So besides the general testing metrics that you would generate and accumulate even if you do manual testing, here are some of the specific automation metrics. So of a given set of test cases, how many are automatable? So it doesn't necessarily mean because that if you have 1,000 test cases, that all of them are actually automatable or it makes sense to automate. Of the percent of automatable test cases, how many are actually automated? So you want to know the automation progress. What about, so now I have automated a lot of test cases, tests that really increased my test coverage. So you really want to know the metric on the increase of test coverage. And most of the time, management wants to know what is the return on investment. If I implement automated testing, what is the return on investment? And you saw the presentation by Bernie earlier, and we have been able to prove the return on investment on various products already. Another thing to show is defects that test automation uncovered that manual testing didn't or couldn't have. And another metric is, what is the automation impact on quality? What we recommend here is if you're already doing some reliability modeling, show how automated software testing could actually increase the reliability of the system. And we have a specific method for that also. In the end, you want to do your test program review and assessment. As I mentioned, we don't generally wait till the end to do a review or assessment. We look at the program, the ATLM, as we implement it. We conduct evaluations and take corrective actions as needed. But still in the end of your testing process, it would be good to check what worked, what didn't, how would you do things differently, and evaluate the automation metrics that you have just produced. So actually, at this point, this is all I wanted to say on the selected best practices based on the Automated Software Testing Lifecycle methodology. And I'm going to hand it over to Bonnie Gauf for the summary.
Thank you, Elfriede. So automated software testing can be a highly effective approach to reducing test time and costs while increasing the quality of the testing conducted. But a strategy, a process, and understanding the technologies is needed to implement automated software testing. And we hope that sharing some of the best practices that we have implemented and learned will help you in applying automation to your projects. And if you have interest in training or just working with you on any pilot projects that you might have, we'd be happy to talk to you about that, as well as other questions that you may have. So, Tom, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Okay. Well, thank you. Really a very good presentation, good overview. And to Bernie's last point, and also we're about to go into the question and answer phase, and if you have questions, we have about 6 questions right now, but if you have questions, feel free to ask them through the GoToWebinar control panel. But first what I wanted to do is we are curious as to if any of you are interested in follow-up. So there we have this one question. There's services that we can offer in this area, or there's training as well. So if you're interested in follow-up, just enter yes to this question. And we'll close this up in about 20 seconds and start asking questions. Okay. 5 seconds here. All right. Now, all right. So I'll ask a series of questions. A bunch more have come in since you stopped here, and some of these questions go back to the very beginning of the presentation. So the person asking may have actually figured out the answer, but I'll ask the questions anyways. So the first question relates to whether or not you are looking at unit testing, or are we just talking about system testing?
Generally speaking, most of what we've focused on is non-unit testing. You could certainly apply automation to unit testing, but what we have primarily focused on is, and what Elfriede described is a process that I would say you would apply to where you're doing testing which integrates maybe multiple units together. So you might call it CSCI level testing, and then at a system level as well.
Okay. One of the people was asking whether or not if any of the tools are compatible with .NET or Microsoft packages, because they see that there's many open source compatible tools with Java and HTML, and they were wondering if there was anything like SharePoint or anything like that that was compatible with .NET.
There's many open source testing tools available for .NET. Here's a website I would recommend people to go to, and it's actually called opensourcetesting.org for all types of open source testing tools that are currently available.
Okay. Opensourcetesting.org, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. A couple people have asked if you could define gray box testing.
Actually, yes. Gray box testing refers to the system internals. So instead of testers are generally familiar with doing black box testing, where they're entering some data through an interface, not really knowing what's going on behind the scenes. But gray box testing means you really understand the application architecture. So if I'm getting an error message through a GUI, I know now to query the database to see if, maybe the data entry has been wrong, or maybe you could even check your database server and see that it's maybe not even that it's turned off. So instead of when you do black box testing, you would say, okay, I'm just seeing a symptom, but I don't really know what the cause of the problem is. And with gray box testing, you can actually run some analytics and figure out yourself what the problem is. And this way you're more, you can be more precise in your defect tracking and talking to your developers what the problem really was.
Okay. One of the people asked if they could get an elaboration on why mimicking the application code is a pitfall in automated test development.
Well, here's an example. We were testing a calculation engine at a previous engagement, and some of the developers actually, instead of just testing the calculation engine, duplicated the code of the calculation engine. So now you have the developer and the tester doing the exact same thing, and it's really not what you want to do. You want to have your developers doing development and your testers doing testing, where your testers then would just actually try to execute the calculation engine instead of duplicating it.
Could you explain what you mean by don't recode what your, I guess if this would be your test tool actually, or AUT actually does?
I think that was probably, wasn't it the same question that you just asked?
Is it the same question? Okay.
Yeah, it sounds like it's the exact same one.
If I could elaborate, Tom, if you end up just duplicating the application code, what we sometimes see is that what that ends up meaning is if the application code was wrong originally, that means the test code that you've written is incorrect as well. They may get the same answer, but in fact, it's going to be the incorrect answer. And so I think going back to the requirements that you're trying to test against is what we found is really the thing to concentrate on.
Okay, very good.
Right, actually, exactly what Bernie said, because we have seen where testers go into the code to try to come up with test cases, and that's pretty much counterproductive, because now you're testing the code based on the code.
I see. In your opinion, when faced with a piece of application workflow that is hard to 100% GUI automate, is it better to write a semi-automated prompt-driven GUI test or spend time writing more test code to get to try the test to run unattended?
I would have to see the application. I think I need a little bit more details on what the issue is here.
Okay. We can get back to with the person asking the
question. It would be difficult to say to keep adding to your GUI test versus adding code to the test code without really seeing the details. And that's why we always go in, before we give any kind of answers to say, yes, this is automatable, we want to know what are the requirements, what are your issues, before we can give you an exact answer.
I think the other consideration for GUI testing in particular also is how often the GUI interface is changing. Oftentimes, as Elfriede mentioned before, the user interface is often the software application that might change the most in a particular program, which in itself then lends itself to probably you want to spend the least time automating that since it's changing so often.
And so the answer is it depends. It depends on which state they are. What state is your GUI in? Is it in a maintenance phase? Is it stable? So it depends on a lot of criteria.
Understand. Okay, this next question is, we have a generic system where data is flown into the application generically. That is, we don't know what data will be available, but logic is based on the selected record data. In this case, should we generate data for each scenario, or should we re-engineer what the development has done?
What I always find most useful is if you can actually get samples of live data. A lot of times, coming up with test data from scratch, you're not able to reproduce all the different data scenarios that the customer will actually come up with. So it's always nice to get a sample set of live data that has really been used in production or out, in the field. So it's very important that you create a set of data that not only gives you the depth, so a large set of data, but also the breadth, so you have all the different combinations and variations of test data.
Okay. Which types of tools are good to use if you are just getting started? Which are more complex or specific and should be used after getting getting some experience with testing?
Well, it depends entirely what experience you have. So, are you a beginning developer? Are you a beginning tester? You have never touched any development code? It really depends. What's nice about capture playback tools, they definitely have some benefits where if you record a script, you have some code already generated, and so maybe that's easier for you. You can take a look at the code and then modify the code because now you have a baseline. But so it really depends on how to get started. Sometimes I recommend people to testers that have never done any development to take, a algorithm course or a development course. Become familiar with Python and Perl scripting. But it depends on your experience.
Okay. What is the best way to organize automated test suites?
I like organizing them based on risk. So the items that are highest risk, such things as most used functionality that absolutely positively has to work, those are the sort of things I would test and automate first. So the major functional path that a customer would take in order to exercise the system, so that's the sort of thing that I would start automating first.
Okay.
So definitely prioritize your automation.
Prioritize the automation, okay. Should quality assurance staff be concerned with automated unit testing coverage, or is that something more for development staff?
Well, okay, here's a couple of things. Is quality assurance the same for you as testing? If that's the case, if you're saying your quality assurance is testing,
right,
then testing should focus on coverage of all the different functional paths, or maybe your developer, since he's focusing on unit testing, is focusing on the unit test path. So, it depends on what kind of testing you're doing, but generally the quality assurance testing professional focuses on the functional coverage,
right,
tracing it back to the requirements again.
Okay. This is a question that was asked before, but just let me double check. this person is looking for code coverage tools for Microsoft.net. Is that the same, the open source testing.org? Is that the place to go?
That's definitely the place to go to look for that.
Code coverage tools for Microsoft.net. Okay.
Right.
What will decide the automatable, I guess is the word, parts of the requirements? How do we decide what requirements can be automated?
There's numerous criteria. So, as mentioned on the one slide, we focus on tests that get repeated over and over again. So, if you're a tester and you receive a software build or a software drop, and now you have to test the exact same features that you had tested before over and over again. So those are the kind of things that you want to automate. If you have a test that maybe you have to run a year-end report, and that report is only generated one time, do you want to automate that? Probably not. But so you really want to think about the types of tests that you have to run over and over again.
This person asked, you did not have silk test among the existing tools. Does it mean you would not recommend a silk test? Actually, I don't know if I know what a silk test is, but
well, silk test is vendor-provided testing tool, and there's no reason this wasn't mentioned. I also didn't mention CompuWare. I just provided a sample set of major vendor tools, but there was no reason. Not all of them were mentioned.
I see. Let's see. Have you analyzed your test script automation standards? In the past, I have set up the test library and sets of subroutines where a test harness for a given screen loads the test routines for each object on the screen. I also have used default data that is overridden in the actual test. So they're asking about test script automation standards.
Yeah, that's a very good question. We actually have our own automated testing standards, and generally, if your testing tool generates C-like language or Java scripts or Java language, it's good to follow the practices that, for example, Java development follows. So again, automated software testing is software development, and you want to follow those same standards that software development follows.
Here's a fairly specific question. Are there any tools that support WebLogic?
I'm sure there are tools out there.
Yeah, there's probably on that open source testing.
But none of
nothing specific. Is there any tool for GUI testing for multimedia applications? Probably the same answer, right?
The challenge with capture playback tools and testing multimedia applications, a lot of times you probably have to record bitmaps, and there's actually a challenge when you record bitmaps, because a bitmap gets recorded at the XY coordinate. So if any of your pixels change or XY coordinates change, your script will fail on playback. So even if there's some tools available, the challenge of automating it might be a big challenge.
I see. Can you speak a little bit about your experience with the usefulness of test automation in an IV&V environment as opposed to a QA environment?
So in that case, are they saying that by the time they come to the independent verification and validation group, they're saying they had already tested the tests, and now the IV&V group is evaluating?
It could be. I would assume that maybe the IV&V group is maybe not all that aware of.
I think typically, it could be very high payoff there. Typically, the IV&V group is going to be doing, at a minimum, regression testing each time a delivery is made to them. And so what we found is that's probably one of the highest payoffs of using automation. So where an IV&V group would have a standard set of or a comprehensive set of automated tests that they would run each time they would receive a new software delivery. And then what they would do is there's probably some new functionality that was delivered with that software build, and they would then focus their time on the new functionality that came with that build after they'd done a regression test, presuming the old functionality should work the same way plus some new features. Then when they'd finish with that delivery, they'd take the test they'd created for the new features and they'd make that part of their next regression test suite. So very high payoff in an IBM environment, I think.
I see. Yeah, sounds like it. This person wants to know what tools would you recommend for automating test results?
Well, when I say automate your analysis, what you really need to automate is, in addition to your results, you have to compare your actual results to your expected results. So you probably have to do some homegrown development like we have developed, but we use Staff and Stacks, the open source automation framework. And then you have your set of expected results. You produce your actual results, and you run a comparison of the two and base your pass or fail on the outcome of that.
I see. What exactly is the difference between white and gray box testing? I realize that's similar to a previous question, but if you could.
Yeah, white box testing is more at the unit, at the code level. So when you, as you develop the code, you do your unit testing, making sure the specific function does what it's supposed to do. And while the gray box testing has the more the entire architecture in mind instead of just at the unit level. That's what the difference is between white and gray box.
Okay. How would you define test harness? Is it the same as framework?
The framework is actually the we call that the system that provides all the different services. So if you wanted to have a service that manages your test cases, or that sends an email if a defect has to be generated, those type of things, that's really the framework, something that you will always use independently of the type of application you're testing. The test harness can be the different data variations that you're pumping through and that you're feeding into the application. So they're very much related, but we differentiate the two.
I see. This person has been doing manual testing for the past 9 years and wants to know what's the best approach to get more familiarized with automated testing or getting started in automated testing.
There's a lot of literature out there you can read up. There's a good website that covers all kinds of QA questions. It's called QAforums.com.
QA Forums, okay.
Yeah, it's QA Forums. And of course, if I want to put in my own plug, there's our book out there that's called Automated Software Testing that you can find on Amazon.com. And if you still need help, you can contact us, edustin@idtus.com.
Lots of questions here. So let's see. Isn't it better to automate the software development process and make the testing part of that high-level automation framework? Have you provided such solution?
Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, let me see. The question is, isn't it better to automate the software development process and make the testing part of that high-level automation framework?
I think that the more testing you can do, up front at a lower level, that's always high payoff. So I think to the extent you can be part of the team that it's doing development and plan for automation right up front, I think there's definitely high payoff to that. At the same time, there are projects that have just passed that point, and there's development that's gone on for a long time and products that exist. And part of what we wanted to share today is there's also an opportunity and high payoff in applying automation to those projects, even at that phase as well.
Okay.
So I think going back to Elfriede's point, I think it really depends on the phase of the project, where you're at, and how you might approach applying automation. But you don't just have to be at the very beginning of the development cycle to think about automated software testing.
In the lifecycle lifecycle methodology, what amount of time is envisioned for the process cycle? With our applications, we have a relatively short developmental cycle, and while I agree with the process steps, we may not have enough time to run through the whole process on a monthly basis.
We like to keep it lightweight, and so what we recommend is that, pick the best practices that work for you, and then implement it. Like mentioned earlier, it doesn't require that you have to, implement all phases along the software development lifecycle, but pick the best practices that, give you the biggest return on investment.
Okay. Is it advisable to use several different open source tools and integrate them together into one automated testing framework?
If that's what your requirements are, saying, if you have requirements that one open source testing tool cannot meet, we would recommend that you can use two open source testing tools.
Is there any benefit of using commercial tools over open source tools?
Actually, we found it very beneficial to use open source testing tools. We have found using, for example, Snapping Stacks or some of the open source defect tracking tools that a lot of them can deliver, just as much functionality as some of the vendor-provided tools that are much lower cost and no maintenance fees.
Okay.
Depends entirely on your environment.
Right. Is there any way to use automated testing tools to perform functional testing of two or more software packages performing the same function without separate scripts for each package being tested?
It depends. Are they two packages using the same technology?
I see. Don't know. What could you say about action-based automation technology, the pros and cons of that?
Well, my experience is if you're working on a program that will be around for 5 years, and you will have, 5 to 10 years, and you have actual, business users, people that are not developers that actually need to use the automation framework, and you just want them to be able to enter the actions into an Excel spreadsheet without worrying about the code behind the scenes. Then, if all of that is in place, then the action-based can work. But if you're in an agile environment where the application changes, you test different applications, the application's only around, for a short amount of time, that type of thing, it might not pay off to develop an action-based framework. So it depends on your needs.
In a service-oriented architecture environment, the services being tested many times don't have a GUI. Which test tools provide the test framework to support those services, both atomic and composite services and workflow?
One company that sticks out when it comes to service-oriented architectural testing is ITKO. Actually, that's also a company that will be at the Verify conference, but they're specializing in automation of SOA.
What documentation should be included with the automated test?
What we include is, first of all, a user's guide. So if we develop automated software tests for our customers, we want to make sure that they can use this automation framework and that they can actually take over the automation framework and run it, and if they needed to, they can develop their own test cases. So user's guide, I think, is very important. And so I think probably the user's guide, how to use the automation framework, that probably would be number one for me.
I think the other thing is for projects that we've worked on in the past, also being able to show the test results against what we would call a requirements traceability matrix. Some organizations might call it an SRVM for a software requirements verification matrix. So we would often have start with the requirements, have those captured and documented in whatever format was best for the project. It could be Excel, it could be Doors, it could be something else. Then to be able to have written down what all the test cases actually are. Elfriede mentioned the user's guide, and then be able to show, after you've run the automation, the test results mapped back to the requirements traceability matrix. So those would probably be the key documents.
I see. Okay. What is the best tool for performance load testing?
I can't tell you which one is the best because it depends again on your environment and your technology, what are you using, but I can tell you which has the biggest market share.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean it's the best.
That doesn't mean it's best. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. This person wants to know, can we start GUI functional automation before the system is completely ready? In other words, when should we start actual recording using any automation tool?
As mentioned during my presentation, GUI testing can be very difficult to automate, specifically if your GUI is constantly changing. So there's definitely some best practices and tricks that you can employ to conduct the GUI testing under that kind of environment. But if your GUI is constantly changing and you don't really know what will be changing, I would recommend to hold off on automating the GUI until it's able.
Okay. The next question relates to selling management. What is the toughest point to get across to management regarding test automation? What sort of things do you hear back from management in terms of resistance or whatever?
Actually, surprisingly, I would say at the management level, it becomes pretty apparent pretty quickly that this should be high payoff. I think some of the challenges are a lot of the questions that we're talking about now about how to get started and what upfront learning there might be in terms of implementing the automation and teams planning around that.
There's perhaps a similar question. In your experience when selling QA, does having a tangible AUT to show a client provide better sales results versus a vague manual approach?
I think it's always impressive to be able to show cost savings. So if you have an application under test and you can show your automated testing will reduce your testing time and will reduce your testing budget, it's always beneficial.
Can I automate applications where I need to open a couple of different windows from the application and compare data from different fields between different screens?
Yes, you can.
Okay. What would be the structure of a typical testing team using an automated tool be? That's an interesting question. What skill sets for these roles?
As mentioned, the automated tester doesn't replace the manual tester, so you really still need the analytical thinking, and if your automated tester knows the testing technique, understands how to develop software. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking for in an automated software tester. So you still need the business knowledge of how the system should work. You still have the user knowledge, the business knowledge, but in order to automate effectively, you really want to employ a developer, someone who knows how to develop software.
Right, I see. Do you have a preferred risk assessment model?
Not necessarily a model. We just have a bunch of items that we look at when it comes to risk evaluation.
How do you design test automation when the software requirements are changing?
Well, I think you would have to focus on those that are the most stable would be the place to start. And just to recognize that, they are changing. I would pick the core requirements that you would identify as the most stable and start working with those first.
If a task requirement is only 80% automatable, what is the best approach of testing it? Using automation, or because it's not 100% automatable, use only manual testing?
Actually, we had a situation like that, and we still would recommend that you automate the 80% because you still have that time saving, but just don't forget that you have to manually test the other 20%. Because a lot of times that's the pitfall. People think, okay, I've automated this test, and they forget about the 20% that are not automated. But I would still recommend to automate as much as you can.
Okay. For client server applications with multiple parameters entry, from your experience, what is the best automation test tool?
Okay. Now, this is an example of a question where we just don't have all the information.
Sure.
We would never go into a company and say, oh, you have a client server application, we'll recommend this, XYZ tool. What we want to know is, if your client server application, we want to know what is your technology on your client server. What are you using? Are you using .NET? Are you using C++? So we cannot answer this question just with this information alone.
Understand. Back to the definition of gray box. This person wants to know, isn't gray box testing really verification?
Gray box testing is testing at the architecture level. It's testing really not just at the black box level, where you only see the GUI output, but you can also see, what's going on behind the scenes. So no, the answer is no. It's not.
Okay. All right. This person just wanted to know, in the opensourcetesting.org link, does it provide links to utilize mock applications for practice?
Actually, there's another website. I can actually provide that to you, Tom.
Sure.
Send it to you. So
that'd be good, and we'll provide it to the attendees.
Right, where you can actually download sample applications for your testing efforts.
Yeah. Okay, how much time could take to develop new scripts for a .NET client-server application with SQL Server? Is less than 2 months an average? I'm just reading the question as it states here. So they want to know how much time it takes to develop the scripts.
It really depends on the size of the, I should say, the number of requirements and test cases that you need to develop. I could certainly say that in general, for projects that we've been working on that are pretty large scale, that's enough time, but I think they really need to look at just how many test cases they needed to develop.
I see. Do any of these tools run in unattended or batch mode?
Yes. Okay. If you recall, for example, Stacks actually has a cron job, and you can actually run it and kick it off at a specific time. So those tools have.
In fact, I would say that's the way you really want to think about using the automation. Is you might have, whether it be 100 test cases or 1,000 test cases you come up with, and what you want to be able to do when you design the automation and you're looking for a test tool or framework is you want to be able to individually select maybe a single test to run. You also want to be able to select groups of tests to run, including to run all of them. Are the kind of features you want to look for in any type of test tool or framework you're using.
All right, just a couple more. I have experienced challenges wherein the tool was unable to identify the GUI controls in the application while automating functional testing. What kind of automation approach do you suggest in cases where we don't have the option of using an alternative tool?
In that case, if your GUI controls cannot be recognized by the tool, again, I would look around and see if there's other tools available that can recognize those controls. The other option would be to just test around those controls, and possibly you have to test those specific controls manually if you cannot find a tool that's compatible with the properties that you're trying to baseline.
Someone wants to know if there's any tools for Macintosh automation.
There actually is. There are some. One of the tools that we're looking at for Linux, and I know it's also compatible for Macintosh, is Frog Logic. There's also a tool called Eggplant.
Okay.
The Eggplant is probably the front runner when it comes to Macintosh.
Macintosh testing. Okay. When do you think automation should be done in the development stage? If there are changes in both the interface and design, then is automation advisable?
You could, like I said, if you don't want to test through the interface and your interface is constantly changing, but maybe, for example, the database has already been laid out correctly and the database schema doesn't change, could automate at the database schema level.
Here's an interesting question. Have you had any experience with model-based testing, and what are the drawbacks?
I've had experience with model-based testing. The drawbacks are you really still, you want to make sure that the model has been developed correctly, that the model points back to requirements. Because, if your model is incorrect, your test cases in the development will be incorrect.
Is it necessary to write manual test cases and then automate them based on priority, or automation could be created not based on written manual test cases?
I don't think you have to base it on manual step-by-step test cases, but I think even when you want to apply automation, you still have to have a plan for what the test case is. And I think having that written down and documented is a good practice to follow. I think the difference is that when I would think of a sort of a manual test case, I would write it one way if I planned for a person to implement it, and if I knew it would be automated, I might be able to write it a little different way.
Right, and the beauty of automated software testing is when you do manual testing, you have to write the testing steps for all your different data scenarios. While with automated testing, you might be able to write the scenario one time and then just read the data from a data file instead of having to duplicate all your different testing steps when you do manual testing.
In your experience, has it always taken a longer time to automate a process rather than just do the unit testing manually?
So when they talk about automating the process, which process?
That's a good question, I assume.
Talking about the software.
No, I'm not sure. Let's see. Let me move on to another question. What automated testing artifacts do you configuration manage?
The requirements traceability matrix, the test cases that we've used for the automation, all the software associated with the automation, including the framework, scripts, input data, output data, and then the results. What's important, and you want a configuration management is you're going to have a set of expected results, and then probably each time you run the test, you want to be able to control the results that were generated from that test execution. And so over time, you could go back and you can see when I ran, my set of tests against baseline version 1.0, I got these results. And when I ran it against version 2.0, I got a second set of results, and then 3.0. So those would be the types of things you'd want to configuration manage.
I see. This next one is more of a comment, so maybe you can just comment on the comment. So this person is saying that their test execution cycle is very short, and they don't have time to automate new software requirements for a quarterly release. So they manually test it, and after the code is deployed, they write automated scripts for the next release and use it as a regression test.
Sounds like a good practice.
Good practice, right.
And the only thing I guess I would question would be is there, if they look at within their 3 or 4 month window of time, it sounds like what kind of testing do they do in that period of time, and if they looked back over, the past year, do they see anything that maybe they're repeating more often than they thought within each quarter, and that might lend itself to automation as well within each build cycle that they have.
Two more questions. All right. Due to the ongoing design and code changes, it was a challenge for us to automate in parallel, so we always were one release behind and used the automation only for regression testing. That's a comment.
Yeah, I think same thing applies there. I think it sounds like a good practice, and again, they could look at within each sort of delivery or build, are there things that they happen to need to repeat each time, as they look back historically, and that would lend itself to automation as well. But if the baseline is changing significantly, sounds like they're employing a pretty good practice.
Mm-hmm. Okay, the last question is a good one. In your experience, has it always taken a longer time to automate a process rather than just do the unit testing manually?
Well, I think it goes back to, you do have to plan to do the automation. There's no question about that. The real payoff is if you're going to need to rerun those same tests 2, 3, 4, 5 times, maybe a lot more than that. That's when the automation really pays off. So I think going back to some of Elfriede's earlier comments, it's important, I think, to look at your program and decide which tests really would pay off from an automation perspective. And those are going to be ones that you're going to run multiple times. And or perhaps the other factor would be the complexity and the length of time associated with them. Some tests are just too complicated to effectively run manually perhaps, or they take so long to run that it's not effective to have a person sitting there doing them. So I think it's how often repeated, it's their complexity, and it's the length the test would go into really deciding what's the best set of tests to automate for your project.
Okay. Well, in the process of getting all these questions, I also got lots of comments, and the comments were the presentation was excellent, and I would certainly agree with that. So I want to thank Elfriede and Bernie for this great presentation.
Good.
And we'll probably try to repeat this again in a month or two. So thanks again.
Tom, you had one more poll, right?
No, we got all the polls.
Oh, you already went that one. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for attending.
Thank you, Tom.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye now.